The Djinn in the Nightingale's Eye by Byatt. Once upon a time, when men and women hurtled through the air on metal wings, when they wore webbed feet and walked on the bottom of the sea, learning the speech of whales and the songs of the dolphins, when purely fleshed and jeweled apparitions of Texan herdsmen and Horus shimmered in the dusk on Nicaraguan hillsides, when folk in Norway and Tasmania in the dead of winter could dream of fresh strawberries, dates, guavas, and passion fruits, and find them spread next morning on their tables, there was a woman who was largely irrelevant, and therefore happy. Her business was storytelling, but she was no ingenious queen in fear of the shroud brought in with the dawn. Nor was she a Naki Bo Malek to usher a Shah through the gates of sleep, nor an Ashik, lover minstrel singing songs of Melmoth the Conqueror and the sack of Byzantium, nor yet a holy dervish in short-skinned trousers and skin skullcap, brandishing axe or club and making its shadow terrible. She was no Madah, telling incredible tales in the Ottoman court or the coffee houses by the market. She was merely a narratologist, a being of secondary order, whose days were spent hunched in great libraries, scrying, interpreting, decoding the fairy tales of childhood and the vodka posters of the grown-up world, the unending romances of golden coffee drinkers, and the impeded couplings of doctors and nurses, dukes and poor maidens, horsewomen and musicians. Sometimes also, she flew. In her impoverished youth she had supposed that scholarship was dry, dusty and static, but now she knew better. 2 or 3 times a year she flew to strange cities, to China, Mexico, and Japan, to Transylvania, Bogota, and the South Seas, where narratologists gather like starlings, parliaments of wise fowls, telling stories about stories. At the time when my story begins, the green sea was black, sleek as the skins of killer whales, and the sluggish waves were on fire, with dancing flames and a great curtain of stinking smoke. The empty deserts were seeded with skulls, and with iron canisters, containing death. Pestilence crept invisibly from dune to dune. In those days, men and women, including narratologists, were afraid to fly east, and the gatherings were diminished. Nevertheless, our narratologist, whose name was Gillian Perholt, found herself in the air, between London and Ankara. Who can tell if she traveled because she was English and stolid and could not quite imagine being blasted out of the sky, or because, although she was indeed an imaginative being and felt an appropriate measure of fear, she could not resist the idea of the journey above the clouds, above the minarets of Istanbul, and the lure of seeing the Golden Horn, the Bosphorus, and the shores of Europe and Asia, face to face. Flying is statistically safer than any other travel, Gillian Perholtz told herself, and surely at this time only slightly less safe, statistically only a little less. She had a phrase for the subtle pleasures of solitary air travel. She spoke it to herself like a charm as a great silver craft detached itself from its umbilical tube at Heathrow, waddled like an albatross across the tarmac, and went up, up through grey curtains of English rain, a carpet of woolly iron-grey English cloud, a world of swirling vapor, trailing its long limbs and scrapes past her tiny porthole, in the blue and gold world that was always there, above the grey, always. Floating redundant, she said to herself, sipping champagne, nibbling salted almonds, whilst all round her spread the fields of heaven, white and rippling, glistening and gleaming, rosy and blue in the shadows, touched by the sun with steady brightness. Floating redundant, she murmured blissfully as the vessel banked and turned, and a disembodied male voice spoke in the cabin, announcing that there was a veil of water vapor over France, but that would burn off, and then they would see the Alps when the time came. Burn off was a powerful term, she thought, rhetorically interesting, for water does not burn, and yet the sun's heat reduces its water to nothing. I am in the midst of fierce forces. I am nearer the sun than any woman of my kind, any ancestress of mine, can ever have dreamed of being. I can look in his direction and stay steadily here, floating redundant. The phrase was, of course, not her own. She was, as I have said, a being of a secondary order. The phrase was John Milton's, plucked from the air, or the circumambient language, at the height of his powers, to describe the beauty of the primordial coils of the insinuating serpent in the paradise garden. Gillian Perholt remembered the very day these words had first coiled into shape and risen in beauty from the page, and struck at her, unsuspecting as Eve. There she was, 16 years old, a golden-haired white virgin with vague blue eyes. She pictured herself so, and there on the ink-stained desk in the dust was a battered emerald-green book, ink-stained too, and second-hand, scribbled across and across by dutiful or impatient female fingers, and everywhere was the smell, still dryly pungent, of hot ink and linoleum and dust if not ashes. And there he was, the creature, insolent and lovely before her. Not with indented wave, prone on the ground, as since, but on his rear, circular base of rising folds, that towered, fold above fold, a surging maze, his head crested aloft, and carbuncle his eyes. With burnished neck of verdant gold, erect, amidst his circling spires, that on the grass floated redundant. Pleasing was his shape, and lovely. And for an instant Gillian Perholt had seen, brilliant and swaying, not the snake Eve had seen in the garden, nor yet the snake that had risen in the dark cave inside the skull of blind John Milton, but a snake, the same snake, in some sense, made of words invisible to the eye. So, as a child, from time to time, she had seen wolves, bears, and small gray men standing between her and the safety of the door, or her father's sleeping Sunday form in an armchair. But I digress, or am about to digress. I called up the snake, I saw him too, in my time, to explain Dr. Perholt's summing up of her own state. In those days she had been taught to explain floating redundant as one of Milton's magical fusings of two languages. Floating, which was Teutonic and to do with floods, and redundant, which was involved in Latinate and to do with overflowings. Now she brought it to her own wit, a knowledge of the modern sense of redundant, which was to say superfluous, unwanted, unnecessary, let go. I'm afraid we shall have to let you go, employers said, everywhere, offering freedom to reluctant Ariels, as though the employees were captive sprites, only too anxious to rush uncontrolled into the elements. Dr. Perholt's wit was only secondary to do with employment, however. It was primary to do with her sex and age, for she was a woman in her 50s, past childbearing, whose 2 children were adults now, had left home and had left England, one for Saskatchewan and one for Sao Paulo, from where they communicated little, for they were occupied with children of their own. Dr. Perholt's husband also had left home, had left Dr. Perholt, had removed himself after 2 years of soul-searching, 2 years of scurrying in and out of their home, self-accusation, irritability, involuntary impotence, rejection of lovingly cooked food, ostentatious display of concealed messages, brief phone calls when Dr. Perholt appeared to be sleeping, missed dinner engagements, mysterious dips in the balance at the bank, bouts of evil-smelling breath full of brandy and stale smoke, also of odd-smelling skin, with touches of alien sweat, hyacinths, and stephanosis, He had gone to Majorca with Emmeline Porter, and from there had sent a fax message to Gillian Perholt, saying he was a coward for doing it this way, but it was also done to save her, and that he was never coming home. Gillian Perholt happened to be in her study when the fax began to manifest itself, announced by a twangling bell and a whirling sound. It rose limp and white in the air and flopped exhausted over the edge of the desk. It was long and self-exculpatory, but there is no need for me to recount it to you. You can imagine it very well for yourself. Equally, you can imagine Emmeline Porter for yourself. She has no more to do with this story. She was 26, that is all you need to know, and more or less what you supposed. Probably. Anyway. Gillian watched the jerky progress and flopping of the fax with admiration, not for Mr. Perholt's fluency, but for the way in which agitated black scribbling could be fed into a machine slit in Majorca and appear simultaneously in Primrose Hill. The fax had been brought from Mr. Perholt, an editorial consultant, to work from home when he was let go or made redundant in the banal sense. But his main user was Gillian Perholt, who received email and story variants from narratologists in Cairo and Auckland, Osaka and Port of Spain. Now the fax was hers, since he was gone. And although she was now redundant as a woman, being neither wife, mother, nor mistress, she was by no means redundant as a narratologist, but on the contrary, in the man everywhere. For this was a time when women were privileged, when female narratologists had skills greatly revered, when there were pythonesses, abscesses, and sibyls in the world of narratology, who revealed mysteries and kept watch at the boundaries of correctness. On receiving the fax, Gillian Perholt stood in the empty study and imagined herself grieving over betrayal, the loss of love, the loss of companionship perhaps, of respect in the world, maybe, as an aging woman rejected for one more youthful. It was a sunny day in Primrose Hill, and the walls of the study were a cheerful golden color, and she saw the room fill up with golden light and felt full of lightness, happiness, and purpose. She felt, she poetically put it to herself, like a prisoner bursting chains and coming blinking out of a dungeon. She felt like a bird confined in a box, like a gas confined in a bottle, that found an opening and rushed out. She felt herself expand in the space of her own life. No more waiting for meals, no more grumbling and jousting, no more exhausted anticipation of alien feelings, no more snoring, no more farts, no more trace of stubble in the wash basin. She considered her reply. She wrote, "Okay, agreed. Clothes and bales in store. Books and chests ditto. We'll change locks. Have a good time. G." She knew she was lucky. Her ancestresses, about whom she thought increasingly often, would probably have been dead by the age she had reached. Dead in childbed, dead of influenza, or tuberculosis, or puerperal fever, or simple exhaustion. Dead, as she traveled back in time, from worn-out unveiling teeth, from cracked kneecaps, from hunger, from lions, tigers, saber-toothed tigers, invading aliens, floods, fires, religious persecution, human sacrifice. Why not? Certain female narratologists talk with pleasure, but awe about wise crones, but she was no crone. She was an unprecedented being, a woman with porcelain-crowned teeth, laser-corrected vision, her own store of money, her own life and field of power, who flew, who slept in luxurious sheets around the world, who gazed out at the white fields under the sun by day and the brightly turning stars by night as she floated redundant,